If you don't notice these signs, you're missing 90% of the animals in the forest. Most people walk without seeing anything, even though animals leave clues everywhere. Tracks, scents, almost invisible details, and yet incredibly precise. Hi there, this is your Wildlife Digital Guide. Today, I'm going to show you 10 signs of animal presence that most people never notice in the forest. Nothing complicated, just small, subtle clues, but incredibly useful if you really want to find wildlife. Because in nature, you're not actually looking for the animal itself. You're looking for what it left behind. And that's when it becomes a bit like an investigation. You observe, you compare, you piece together clues, and you understand what happened before you arrived. Once you learn to read all of this, your outings completely change. You notice more, you understand the forest better, and it becomes so much more exciting. Alright, let's dive in. The first sign, and probably the easiest to spot once you know what to look for, is animal trails. These are tiny, subtle paths, almost invisible at first glance. The grass is slightly pressed down, slightly opened, always in the exact same place. Why? Because animals love routine. They always follow the same routes, almost as if the forest had its own sidewalks, but reserved for deer, foxes, wild boar, and so on. These natural corridors are real invisible highways. And when you find one, you already have an important piece of information. You're in a zone of regular movement. And that's absolutely a spot worth returning to. Because if animals use it every day, or almost, sooner or later, if you come back at the right moment, you'll end up crossing paths with one. Second sign, tracks on the ground. A lot of people think that without snow, you can't see anything. But in reality, mud, damp soil, and even sand preserve footprints incredibly well. You just need to take the time to look where you're walking. Here, you can clearly see the shape of the paw, the direction, and even the depth of the steps. It seems simple, but it's one of the most reliable clues to understand what happened just before you arrived. A fresh track gives you two key pieces of information. The animal is probably not far, and you can see exactly which direction it's moving. The sharper the print, the more recent it is. And if you find several tracks in a row, it's like reading a little story on the ground. You can follow the path, understand whether the animal was walking, running, or simply looking for food. And here's a tip that really makes a difference. The best times to spot tracks are right after fresh snowfall, or right after rain. Nature becomes like a blank canvas, and the footprints stand out much more clearly. Sometimes you can even follow a deer or a fox for dozens of meters. Third sign, droppings. It may not be the most glamorous clue, but it's one of the most informative. Scat tells you a lot: what the animal eats, its size, its health, how often it passes through. And most importantly, if you find some, it means the area is truly active. Here, for example, you can clearly see roe deer droppings, also called pellets. It's a reliable clue. When you find several piles scattered in one area, it means the animal comes back regularly. It's not just a one-time passage, it's a spot it uses often. And as always, observe, respect, don't touch anything. There's no need to pick anything up to get a better look. Simply noticing the shape, the size, and the amount already gives you everything you need. And by combining this with tracks or trails nearby, you can quickly understand how much the area is used. Fourth sign, hares caught on something. This is one of the most discreet clues, but also one of the most interesting. Sometimes, it only takes a tiny detail, a small tuft of hair snagged on a branch, a rock, a fence, or even barbed wire. This kind of clue appears when an animal passes very close, through a tight or narrow spot. And it's never random. Either it uses this passage regularly, or it follows a very specific route again and again. By looking at the color and texture, you can sometimes even guess the species. Light and fine, roe deer, slightly longer and reddish, fox, dark and coarse, wild boar. Though in the field, you should always stay cautious with identification. What matters most is the core information. If a hare is caught there, an animal passed recently, and it will probably pass again. It's a small, delicate clue, but one that tells you a lot about local movement patterns. Fifth sign, feathers on the ground, or signs of predation. It's not the happiest clue, but it's a very revealing one. Finding scattered feathers, or sometimes a few small remains, gives you two important pieces of information. There are birds in the area, and there are predators hunting here. Foxes, martens, weasels, birds of prey, each leaves different clues. Feathers cleanly plucked and spread around. Often the sign of a nocturnal raptor attack, like an owl or a tawny owl. Feathers that look broken or slightly chewed. That can come from a fox or a marten. And sometimes, you only find a few light, fine feathers in one spot. Simply the trace of a bird waking up, preening, or losing a few feathers during a molt. In every case, it's a very rich clue. The area is active, used, and you're in the middle of a living zone, whether for feeding, resting, or hunting. Sixth sign, marked trees. In the forest, trees are like a giant canvas where certain animals leave their signatures. Deer, roe deer, and wild boar often mark their territory by rubbing their antlers, tusks, or even their bodies against the trunks. The result? Stripped bark, rubbing marks, small branches broken or twisted, sometimes even mud or hairs left on the trunk. These marks are very reliable because they show that the animal regularly uses this spot to rub, scent mark, or simply prepare its antlers. These are extremely solid clues, and the same areas often come back year after year. Cervids, for example, love using the same trees, especially during the rut. This is exactly the kind of thing I always take notes on. These zones stay active for a long time, sometimes across multiple seasons. Coming back regularly to the same spot often helps you understand the habits of the animals in the area. Seventh sign, overturned soil, dug up areas, or scratched ground. When you find a spot where the ground has been dug up, disturbed, or even plowed, it's almost never by accident. Wild boar, foxes, and many mustelids, like martens or badgers, dig into the soil to look for food, roots, worms, larvae, fallen fruits, or small rodents. Wild boar often leave very visible signs, large patches of overturned earth, snout marks, and clumps of grass ripped out. Foxes and mustelids, on the other hand, dig much more delicately. They make small, precise holes, leave lightly scraped patches, or spots of freshly moved soil. In every case, these are very interesting clues. They show that animals come here to feed, that the soil is rich, and that the area is visited regularly. Spotting this kind of sign means understanding that you've found one of the key daily locations, a natural restaurant they love to use. Eighth sign, natural alarm calls. In the forest, birds are a bit like the guardians of the territory. Tits, blackbirds, robins, thrushes, and especially jays, react instantly when a predator gets close. They start calling loudly, moving abruptly, or giving quick, repeated alarm notes. Why? Because they're warning everyone, careful, danger. Someone's coming. And for an observer, that's pure gold. If you hear a jay shouting from a branch, or a group of tits suddenly getting agitated, it's never for nothing. It's often a sign that a fox, a marten, a wildcat, or even a bird of prey is moving nearby. Alarm calls are like a free, precise, and incredibly reliable early warning system. Once you learn to recognize these behaviors, you detect what's happening around you much faster, even if you don't see anything yet. A simple tip. When the forest changes its sound, stop. Look, listen. There's usually something going on. Ninth sign, carcasses or bones. It's definitely not the most pleasant clue, but out in the field, it's a very important one. A carcass or a few bones indicate that an animal has been preyed upon, or that a scavenger passed through. Foxes, raptors, martens, buzzards, crows, all sometimes leave behind remains that are more or less visible. This kind of clue reveals two essential things. There are prey species in the area, and there are active predators hunting here. Sometimes, an old carcass simply shows that the area is regularly visited. And sometimes, a very fresh carcass can mean a predator is still nearby. And as always, observe, respect, don't touch anything. There's nothing to move or handle. These clues speak for themselves and already give you everything you need to understand the activity in the area. And finally, the 10th sign, one of the richest, transition zones. These are all the places where two habitats meet. Forest edges, meadow borders, clearings, the boundaries between dense undergrowth and open areas, natural corridors where the vegetation changes. These places are true crossroads for wildlife. Animals love these zones because they offer everything they need: food, shelter, discreet pathways, and above all, good visibility to detect danger. In short, if you want to increase your chances of spotting something, this is really where you should look first. These are strategic points. Areas where roe deer move around, where foxes hunt, and where birds travel from one habitat to another. All the signs we've just talked about. When I'm out scouting, I group them together in my tool so I can have, at a glance, a clear picture of everything that's truly active around me. When you understand how the terrain is structured, you already understand a big part of the animal's behavior. There you go, you now know the 10 signs of wildlife presence that most people never notice. The more you practice spotting them, the more exciting your outings become, and the more you start to understand the forest in a whole new way. Thanks for watching this video all the way through. If you learned something, consider leaving a like, it really helps us a lot. Subscribe if you want to keep improving and discover more techniques for observing wildlife. And tell me in the comments, which sign do you notice most often? I'll see you very soon for the next video.